guest, without further ado, Cory Lambertson.
Thank you, Bernie.
You're welcome.
So before we get started, who all here actually has a 3D printer? Quite a few. Very cool. All right. So some of this may be a little elementary at first, but I just have to cover some of the basics before we get into some of the, I guess, meatier parts of the tips, tricks, and hacks. So just in general, we all know to be able to get to 3D printing, we need to have something in the beginning, whether it's an impression, a gypsum model, or an intraoral scan of some sort, and then from there it has to go to a median of having a CAD design station, and then you can export out your product to actually go to 3D printing. So if you don't have any of the first steps of having CAD design in your laboratory, you're really going to want to get into that, so then you can get into 3D printing. You can't 3D print without it, really. So 3D printing itself is a printing process that involves making three-dimensional objects from digital models by applying many thin layers of material on top of each other. Pretty straightforward. You're just going layer after layer after layer, and we're creating an additive manufactured device. So for those systems, there's multiple types of 3D printing that we see on the market today. We have fused deposition modeling, we have SOS, SLM, the sterile lithography, or photopolymerization, which is what we're going to focus on today. That's the most popular. I'm going to probably guess that that's what everybody here has, a photopolymer printer. Is that correct? The people that did raise their hand. We kind of see a little bit of binder jet printing in the dental industry. We really see polyjet or material jetting dispensing. You see that with Stratasys 3D printers. 3D Systems has a material jetting printer. And another cool printer that's out on the market, I'm sure you guys have actually seen it, would be the Valplast 3D printer. So that would be like the FDM process. So for sterile lithography, this is a general term that is actually multiple print types. A lot of people get confused that sterile lithography is only one type of printing, which would be sterile lithography laser. If we look at the definition of sterile lithography, it's the process of solidifying a photopolymer resin layer by layer that is activated by a UV light engine. So when this technology first came out, it started off as sterile lithography laser, but now it has evolved to DLP sterile lithography, which will cover a little bit more of a breakdown of that. And then a even newer technology that you've seen come out is mask SLA. So it actually uses a LCD mask to block light and allow light to bleed through. So the most common first form of 3D printing for sterile lithography is sterile lithography laser. So you can see here, all the printers, they have a light engine. For this one, it'd be a UV laser that's going to shine up, and it's going to cure every layer that needs to be cured to be able to create the object. So the downfall of this type of printing is that it takes a long time. We have to draw every slice, every section of that model to be printed. The most common printers that we see on the market for this is a Formlabs printer. Show of hands, who has a Formlabs printer? Okay. So next would be DWS, which is based out of Italy, and then they have there's another company, XYZ Printing. They have a Noble 1A. It's just a very inexpensive sterile lithography laser 3D printer. Now it has evolved from that to a DLP printer, a DLP process of sterile lithography. This houses technology that was created by Texas Instruments. They manufactured the first DLP chip. We can see that there. Essentially what it is, it's a microchip that has thousands of mirrors on it that actuate to expose where the light needs to be exposed in the projector. So we can see with the DLP projector, we can expose a full layer all at once. We don't have to wait and draw on every single section. Because of this, we're able to increase the speeds. So I'm sure you all know Whitmix is associated with Sega. We are the exclusive North America reseller for the Sega 3D printers. But other printers that house this technology would be EnvisionTech, Kudo 3D, Carbon, huge game changer with how fast their printers are. Culzer, which is also if you guys have seen the V9 Creations printer, it's the exact same printer. 3D Systems has a DLP printer. We have NuPro 3D, which is a very similar technology to Carbon, Sprint Ray, and then Accuretta. So these are all, pretty well-known dental 3D printers. Now what divides them amongst the others is going to be the quality of the parts that are put into it. Are they using all glass optics? Are they using servo motors? Are they using stepper motors to control the lift of the build head? You know, it comes down to how much money they actually put into it and how much R&D they put into the printers, which really is what divides the price structure between them. Some of these cost $3,000 all the way up to over $150,000 to build a home. Now mask LCD, which is the newer form, it's very similar to DLP. It cures the whole layer all at once, every slice, but it uses a LCD mask that is backlit by an LED light. So what happens is that the light shines on, the LCD mask then blocks out what is not supposed to be exposed, and it will expose the proper image to cure onto the build head. So the downfall of this technology, from what I've heard from users of it and also manufacturers, is that LCD panel has a very short lifespan. It actually overheats, and it will no longer allow the correct images to shine through. Now with that, the biggest game player for this type of technology is Structo 3D, and then there's a lot of inexpensive 3D printers. Frozen Make, Uniz, Anycubic, Keto 3D beam printer, so that one is actually on Kickstarter for $400. Now, does that mean it's going to be a great printer for dentistry? Don't know until you actually try it. It is a Kickstarter printer. I mean, it's not something that is developed for the dental industry. Structo 3D, however, was. So, how does my printer really work? We watch it actually print when we're at the laboratories. We see that the build head goes down, it does some magic, and then a couple hours later we have our actual devices. So let's give a little bit of a breakdown of what is actually happening. The very first layer, which is the most important layer when 3D printing, is called the burn-in layer. So this layer is actually what helps the object stick to the build plate. If this is not an appropriate time, the objects will fail. So who all here has had a failed print where nothing sticks to the build plate? So I see another raise of hands. So there's a certain struggle that we all go through, and I'll be able to actually kind of help you recover from that, and tips on how to improve that adhesion. But essentially, if the first layer does not stick, nothing sticks at all. So if we have a proper burn-in exposure time, now we have a normal layer exposure time. So this is all the layers after that initial first layer. So with that, it's going to be a lot less, maybe 3 seconds. For a foam mask printer, it's probably a little bit longer because once again you have to draw on every single section. So if we have the first layer down, we have the second layers. It's pretty simple. After that, we just separate in between. And so we have to deal with separation speeds, and this is really going to come down to the viscosity of your resin. You don't want to have a printer that is so fast that when it separates that it actually will pull the objects off of the build head. There is a science behind how fast your printer should be for the viscosity of the resin that you're using. It plays a huge factor in separation and approach forces. If the build head actually goes down too fast in a very thick resin, it creates a cantilever effect on the build head, and it will actually cause an uneven layer. And so you'll see, if you look at your models, really from any 3D printer, if you look at the first 2 millimeters, you see that kind of the layers aren't really stacking the way they should. They kind of look a little wavy. What's happening is that the build head is traveling too fast. It's not allowing for resin to settle, and light is exposing while resin is moving. Also, you want to have delays between layers. So with that, you'll actually have allow the resin to actually settle. So when the build head separates, the resin needs to settle back to cover the full surface area of the vat, the resin vat. After that, we have to wait for after our approach and exposure depending on the resins. Now, if that's not complicated enough, we have to scale the resin. All resin shrinks when it's cured. So in the printer software, there is a scale compensation that should be scaling the resin properly before actually getting into the printer. So if you've ever dealt with having objects too small coming out of the printer, this is all coming to the chemistry of the resin on how fast that reaction is. And then we have XY compensation, which actually compensates for growth. So if an object, when it's being printed, it's going to shrink ever so slightly. It's just natural science for resins. But if you have too much light exposing, you have growth. So now the printer has to compensate for that growth of overexposure. It may be a little complicated. If you guys have any questions, I will be over at the booth next door, and I can kind of give a little bit of more of a breakdown for it. So we kind of see how the printer works, but how do we define accuracy? Well, accuracy for 3D printers is going to be defined on the X, Y, and Z plane. Now, if you're in the market for looking at printers, you'll see a lot of competitors will actually put the Z layer height as the accuracy. So it's going to say, oh, I can print in 10 microns. Well, it doesn't say if it's Z or XY, because all Z does is actually a surface quality. So we'll see this here in a second. Really, what we want is a low XY number that defines the accuracy. So laser DLP is going to have a fairly large XY accuracy. It's going to be about 150 microns XY, which for that, the smallest feature size you can print is 150 microns. It's extremely large when you're starting to look at dentistry. From there, the DLP printers, they actually project pixels. So just like this projector here, we can see if you look close, there's thousands of pixels that go across, and the pixels are very small, and that's what's creating the shape itself. So with that, you can actually achieve a higher detail with a DLP printer and a mask SLA printer as well, because it's very similar technology with the pixels. So to actually see it a little bit better, we have two DLP printers here. One has a 32 micron XY precision, the other one has a 75. We can see they're both the same size circles. We can see that the 75 actually has jagged edges around it. And we can see on the 32 micron how smooth it is. This is actually what's going to improve the precision. The smaller you have for that XY accuracy, the better the printer is going to be. Also, pixels cannot be completely off, and they can only be completely on. So if anybody's here struggling with removable die fit, I have an actual formula for that for you guys to go with. So for the Z resolution, we can see here that all this is going to be surface quality. So the object on the right is going to be a lot smoother than the object on the left. So this is the layer thickness that you're printing the objects in. So there is a trade-off with this. If you print an object in a thicker Z layer height, it's going to print a lot faster than if you print something with a finer Z layer height. So this is your layer thickness. So whenever you're looking at 3D printers, make sure that you see the difference between what the XY resolution is and what the Z resolution is. Acceptable Z resolution for models or demo models or even just about anything is 50 micron layers. So if you go to look at printers, if you can't buy a printer that can do a 50 micron layer height, don't get it. For XY precision, I would try to stick anything less than 75 and lower for XY accuracy. So to take it even one step further, does anybody here know what anti-aliasing is? Okay, will today. So anti-aliasing is a technique used to add greater realism to a digital image by smoothing jagged edges on a curved surface. So this feature, anti-aliasing, you'll see on some of the top of the line DLP 3D printers. What this does, it turns on a pixel completely, but it doesn't actually put it completely bright white. So it's going to actually create like a gray mask, and it's going to allow the surface to do a semi-cure. So if you look at the models that come off our Asiga 3D printers, the surface finish is extremely smooth, and that's how we're able to achieve that. So if you're looking at printers, make sure that they have anti-aliasing. You'll get a higher surface quality as well. So we kind of just touched on the precision of printers, but how do you really prove it? How do you know that your models are actually what they are supposed to be? Well, we have 3D comparison. So essentially we can take a scan of a model that you printed, and then the actual STL file of the model that you designed, and you overlay the two, and we get a heat map of where your precision lies. So all the way to the left, we have our Asiga 3D printer, and then we have two of the top competition 3D printers. These two printers on the right are over $100,000 to build own. Now, with that, we can see how to read this. over here on the right-hand side, so if you ever see these maps, they will have values. So all these printers had a plus or minus accuracy of 75 microns. So I actually put that in, and then you can place greater values outside of it. So what we're looking for when you read this heat map, and you have this gauge, is we want it to plateau almost right at 0. So between these two dots, we have a 0 point, and the highest precision is almost at 0 with this 3D printer. That one is a little bit off, and on the Sega is just about spot on. Also, I can see within the precision of the printer, 92.3% of it matched up to the actual printed model, to the actual STL, which is what we're looking for. We want that type of perfection. The other printers, they both did really well, it's just you pay a lot more for it. But how do you get around being able to do that in your laboratory? I mean, unless you're willing to spend $10,000 to build up a software that can do this, there's really no way, except there actually is. So can we perform 3D comparisons in-house? Absolutely. So if you have a 3-shape scanner, now this will work with exocad and dental wings as well. This is going to be the same method. Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to create a fake order form, and what I actually do is I'll put it up as a coping design, so then I don't have to have an antagonist. And then I'll set my neighborhood scan as unsectioned, and then I'll turn on my pre-preparation option. So with that, when I open up the scan software, this is going to give me the ability to import 2 scans. So first, the STL file, I can import that of my actual outputted file, and then I can scan what my model was printed. So when you open up the scan software, this is on the latest version of 3Shape. To import scans, there is a feature on the left-hand side on the bottom. You just browse for the folder, import it in. From there, you will align the 2 scans, and then you can do a 2D cross-section and actually see how accurate you are. So this was a resin that we were validating for another company, and we printed it on the Sega printer, and we can see that this resin, if you look all the way around it, the purple is actually the STL file that we exported out. The yellow, or the cream color, the beige, is the actual model that we 3D printed and scanned and imported in. We can see that resin had a high shrinkage content. So the model was actually smaller than what it was supposed to be. In crucial areas, my interproximal contacts, they're off by a margin of 65 microns. I mean, that's huge. So what you have to do is then go into the software of the printer, and it really helps if you have an open source 3D printer. You can actually change your own scale factor to match until you have complete accuracy. So yes, you can do this in-house, and I highly recommend it, especially if you are, if you're going through and testing 3D printers from other companies. Have a master model that you design. Go ahead and send that out. Have them print it when it comes in. Do this comparison process so that you can actually see how accurate the models are. So what we need to know about 3D print resin, there's actually quite a bit. So if you look, all right, so it first starts off, if you're looking at resin and you're looking at printers, we can say we can purchase them in different wavelengths. So we have a 405 wavelength for a light, and we have a 385. At first this was really confusing to me, but after I've actually used both sets of printers, that 385 by far is the direction you want to go. So I put in red, must use resin formulas that are compatible with the printer. So if you have a printer that is a 405 wavelength, you need to use resin that is developed for that 405 wavelength. So if you're purchasing open source and you want to use this other resin, make sure it's a 405 wavelength, or else you'll have a lot of issues with overexposure and cure through. And I can explain what that is as well. Now at 385, so I put there, you must use the same compatible wavelengths. 385 projectors can actually print the 405 resins. The reason why is because they have a controllable depth of cure in that non-visible light spectrum, which allows you to use the 405 resin. It's kind of hard to explain until you see it firsthand. Now, the main differences between the two, 405 is visible light, 385 is ultraviolet. Now, 385, if you look into it for a long period of time, like actually look into a 385 projected light, you're going to go blind, so don't do that. The 405, it's a little bit easier on the eyes. Now, the 385 has a higher energy, so you can actually cure and print truly clear resins and not have issues of curing into unwanted areas. So this is where the cure through is when that light is projecting on the object that you're printing. If it's a clear object, the light can actually transpose through and actually cure resting resin that may be on a supportive object. So with the 385, you don't have that issue. You can actually print true clear resin because it breaks down the photo initiators due to the high strength of it. And with 385, you get access to the unique chemistries. So when more and more biocompatible resins come out, you're going to see that they're directed more at the 385 market, because with that 385 light spectrum, you can dip into different chemistries. It's really awesome on what you can achieve with it. So there are health hazards with resin. So if you touch it with your skin, you can easily get irritations and rashes. You can even have loss of sensitivity on your fingertips. So whenever you're handling the resin, please put gloves on. If you put it in your eyes, don't. It's not eye drops. So, I mean, you can go blind from it. Who all here is using Formlab's model resin? Have you ever smelled it?
Yeah, it all smells pretty.
It smells pretty bad, doesn't it? Yeah. So they use, essentially, to break down their photo initiator, they have to use a solvent of some sort. And so that model material has a high solvent content. It actually smells flammable. I mean, it smells really bad. So you don't want to breathe it in. You don't want to stand there and huff a tray of resin. And then, of course, you don't want to drink it. It's really harmful stuff. I know this seems kind of common sense, but you'd be surprised. So how to handle it? Obviously, we need to be in a hazmat suit from 1918 because that looks awesome. But really, apron, lab coat, something just to cover your clothes, because if you've ever received or put resin on your clothes, it is not going to come out. One of a coworker of mine, he was moving a clear resin tray of the clear surgical guide material. I mean, it's crystal clear, you can't see it. He grabbed the tray and shoved back. He thought it was just an empty tray. It went all down him. His shirt permanently is starched. So it's extremely stiff, and he actually poured a bottle of vodka through it to try to clean it up. It doesn't work. But protect your clothes, protect yourself, wear vinyl nitrate gloves, safety glasses, even a mask if you have something that has a high solvent content in it, a lot of fumes. Now, the ideal print environment, I cannot stress this enough, is a clean environment. I know laboratories can be dirty, they can be dusty. You know, put a ventilation system in, or a filtration system to go ahead and try to get those dust particles out in your print room, and try to keep it as clean as possible. Emergency eye wash station, that would only be ideal if you could actually make that happen. Learning institutions, they do have access to that. And if you get in your eyes, you're really going to want to use that. So tips for working with the resin. So usage and storage, it is number one most important thing is read the instructions of use for any resin that you have. Some resins, they require you to shake it up for 5 minutes. Some resins require you to shake the bottle for 3 hours. So Nextent resin, you actually have to oscillate their resin bottles for 2 to 3 hours to actually have the resin mixed back together into a homogeneous mixture. The reason why you have to mix it in general is because there's pigments in it and they settle out. So this is just like the paint that you buy at Home Depot. You have to mix it before you can start using it. It's because the pigments settle out, the colors settle out. So with resin, it's extremely important, because if the pigments have settled out, those actually, they have, oh, there we go. So the pigments, when they settle out, they, there's photo blockers in the resin itself. There's adhesion improvers in the resin. So if all that settles out and it's at the bottom of the bottle, and you go and pour your resin into your vat and you start printing, you're going to probably have a lot of overexposure, and so you'll have a lot of flash on the models. And to actually clean your resin out, if it has a lot of flash in it, you need to strain it. So what we recommend is a 200 micron paint strainer. You can get that at Harbor Freight, and it's really inexpensive. You want to store the resin bottles in dark areas, so the canisters that they come in, we actually have our castable resin that has a white lid on it, and so that castable resin is so reactive that I put it on, put the lid on, and I set it next to the printer. Came back a week later to pour some more resin in for some testing I was doing, and I couldn't get the lid off because the lid actually is solidified. The resin actually cured just from the ambient light shining through the lid of the bottle. So you want to keep, store it in a dark area, and then also your resin trays, when you're not using them, easy way to store them is put them in the boxes that you receive the trays in. So they come in a cardboard box, just put them in there, set them aside, put them in a cabinet, and then use them when you're ready. I get a common question about, well, how long can I keep a resin in a tray for? How can I keep it there for a day? Do I have to pour it back out when I'm done printing? The answer is no. You can actually keep it in there for as long as you want. Some trays, though, that have a silicone base layer, the material is called PDMS. You actually don't want to store your resin in that because it'll actually absorb the resin over a longer period of time and it can become cloudy. If you're using a printer that has a Teflon vat on the bottom or a Teflon film, you can store resin in there for as long as you want, and when you're ready to use it, take a business card, mix it back up to mix the pigments back together so it's a homogeneous mixture again, throw it in the printer and start printing. So what do you look for in a quality resin? First off, most important is low shrinkage and low warpage. They kind of go hand in hand. Fun to do. They make a resin and Maker Juice. They both make really inexpensive photopolymer resins that you can use in these 3D printers. But you pay for what you get. They do warp excessively and extremely fast, and they have a very very high shrinkage content. So we print a 10 millimeter cube, and we get about a 9 millimeter cube out of it. So it's shrinking almost a full millimeter, which is huge. Suspended pigments, you want a resin that actually holds the pigments in. There's part of the development when you're making resin, there's an additive that you can put in that actually allows the pigments to stay suspended for a longer period of time. A lot of resins, they don't have that. So after a couple hours of use, you'll actually look at the resin tray when you're printing and you can see there's actually a separation in the resin itself. Easy post-processing, we'll cover that here in a minute. Low odor, and then biocompatibility. So biocompatibility, when you're looking at that, you definitely want to make sure that it's even registered with the FDA. And if you're actually going to use it for intraoral use, find a resin that has a 510K clearance. There aren't any right now. So there's a rush to the market for people to actually get that. Now you'll see a lot of biocompatible resins that say, well, they're classified 2A. That's great if you're in Europe, but we're not. So you can't really, you can use it, it's at your discretion. It's not toxic, but it's also not registered with the FDA. So how to post-process parts. For the guys that have 3D printers here, this is going to sound very similar. For best results, follow the instructions of use provided by the resin manufacturer. It is mandatory for biocompatible resins. So before you purchase a biocompatible resin, read the instructions to see what you have to do after you're done printing. If you have to put it in an alcohol bath for 3 days, and then put it in a curing chamber for 6 months, and then put it in an oven for an hour, and that's what they tested for the biocompatibility, you have to do that exact same process to be biocompatible. If you do not, you are not producing a biocompatible device. So how to clean? We use the isopropyl alcohol bath, 90% or greater. Medical supply stores should have 99%. You'll probably get the best deal there as well. What we recommend at Whitmix is a 2-wash system and an ultrasonic cleaner. Formlabs does have a great cleaning. Their cleaning container actually has a propeller in the bottom and actually moves the alcohol around. It does a really good job. So we do 2 5-minute baths. So we have a dirty bath and then a clean bath. The dirty bath is to help break down the large amounts of liquid resin that's still on the models. The clean bath is just to actually do a final surface clean on it. Now, how you tell if your models are still dirty is they'll actually be kind of slimy. After you're done, after you take them out of the alcohol, go ahead and take a compressed air, dry them off. If they still have a slimy feel to them, they still have active resin on it, and you need to put it back in the ultrasonic cleaner. Or if they're shiny. So if they have a shiny texture to them, they're most likely still dirty. And if you put it in that curing chamber, let's say if it was in a die hole, your die will never fit. There's no way. So how to cure, make sure objects are completely dry, and then a light cycle of 5 to 10 minutes. I see some, when you're doing like models or castables, anything that's not being introduced to the patient's mouth, you can go with a shorter light cycle time or not even cure at all, because all it's doing is just a surface cure. It's not actually, it'll make it a little bit stronger, but it's not to the point that you're really going to notice it. So if you're curing your models for over a half hour, there's really no point, because it's already done in the first 5 to 10 minutes. And then curing unit acceptable for resin. Biocompatible, you do need to follow that instructions of use. So Nextent and I think DTEX both require a nitrogen exposed curing chamber. So what that does is that actually creates an oxygen inhibition layer, and with that oxygen inhibition layer in a large amount of light, you're actually able to cure the active monomers that's on the external surface of the device. So make sure that you do your research before printing the biocompatible resins. Now I do have a quick video on how to remove the objects from the build plate. From what I found from all the tools that's available, the 3 that I like the best, and it doesn't feel like you're going to cut your arm off, is a number 2 X-Acto knife handle, a 1/2 inch wide chisel blade, and then a jeweler's hammer. So I actually have a quick video of it.
All right, this is Brandon Smith with Whipmix, post-processing models off of the Max printer. The post-processing is the same for the Max as well as the Pro 275.
So I'm using an X-Acto knife.
Alright. So he's using an X-Acto knife chisel blade. From there he just puts it on the edge of the model and then uses a hammer. And
then what we'll do is we'll put the models in a dirty bath first for 5 minutes in the ultrasonic, and then we'll put them in a clean bath for an additional 5 minutes in the ultrasonic. Once they come out of here, they'll go into a light cure box, and they'll go in there for an additional 5 minutes. And then that finishes out the post-processing. Just make sure that before you put them in the light cure box that you have completely dried the models, no resin or alcohol residue left on them. That way when they come out, they're not tacky. To clean your build head, just use a regular paper towel and some of the alcohol that you use for post-processing, which it's just regular IPA alcohol. You can get it at any drugstore. Squirt a little on your build head and just wipe it down. Make sure that when you do this, you always wear gloves. This resin can be toxic before it's cured, so you don't want to expose your skin to it. And just once you clean your build head, it goes back in and you're ready for your next print job.
And total post-processing, 15 to 20 minutes?
Yeah, about 15-20 minutes.
Thanks, Brandon.
You're welcome.
so with that chiseling blade and the jeweler's hammer, essentially you just place that on the back of the models and just tap lightly on it, and it'll actually release it directly off of the build plate. The scraping tools that come with the 3D printers, every printer comes with it. You feel like you're going to cut your arm off when you're using it, because usually it's really flexible. It just doesn't feel safe. This, you have an actual way to control your movements. And if anybody knows Brandon, go ahead and heckle him, because he doesn't know he's in this video. I didn't really get permission, but I did anyways. All right, so another question that I get is, how do I dispose unwanted resin waste? So if you have a little bit of leftover resin, if it's unpolymerized, so uncured resin, it is hazardous to the environment, and if you need to dispose of it, you're going to need to contact local government to see how it's regulated to dispose of that resin. This would be regulated at the city level. Tip for dirty alcohol to actually dispose of that is go ahead and take your dirty alcohol from your curing or from your cleaning station. Go ahead and start pouring it into a 5-gallon bucket. Set that 5-gallon bucket outside, and it will actually slowly evaporate. And then the sun will also polymerize any active resin that's in that bucket. For polymerized, so if it's cured, you just simply throw it in the trash. Cured unwanted resin, you can cure unwanted resin by placing it in a clear container, so like a Ziploc bag, cup, and then actually place that into your curing unit, and it will cure that resin. From there, you can actually dispose of it. I get this question also, can you recycle cured resin? The answer is no, not right now. Reason why is because it's extremely hard to break down the printed objects to actually recycle any part of it. So 3D printing design and support tips. So for hollow models, hollow dental models, these are settings that I highly recommend that you live by. So printing a solid model is pretty straightforward. There's no tricks to it. You just print it. For a hollow model, however, if you want to print it and have the best surface quality, it needs to be at least 2 millimeters thick. I recommend 3 millimeters. From there, in 3 shape, you're going to want to have variable thickness on. So variable thickness, this actually allows for it to be a printer-friendly shape. If this actually was 2 millimeters all the way down and around, we'd have to place supports internally. With this, we don't have to put supports on the inside or the internal surface of the model. And then must use drain holes. So a lot of people, they don't like the drain holes, but actually what this does is this allows resin to breathe through the model when it's actually printing and curing. So if this was a solid model all the way through, or a hollow model but solid sides, once the printer actually starts to close off that structure, it's going to trap pressure. And what's going to happen is that resin is going to be trying to escape from it, and you'll have actually you can have potentially the printer will stop printing at that point. It's not going to adhere properly for those layers because of the amount of pressure that's there. And then also, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. You'll have just uneven surfaces on the edge of that model. So by putting those drain holes on the side, you actually allow the resin to breathe properly. And you can place this type of model directly on the build plate. You don't have to put supports underneath of it. So I have a couple photos of Improper Designs. So this one has the variable thickness turned on, but it does not have the drain holes on the side. You can kind of get success with this if you print it. Actually, you can get success, but you have to put supports underneath the object. So with it supported off of the build head, you actually will allow the resin to breathe properly. And then the worst design you can have for a hollow model is actually have the bottom of the model closed off. It'll trap liquid resin inside, and your models will leak for until there's no more resin on the inside of the model. We actually received that photo from a customer. He's very unhappy with our models. They kept leaking on them. He's like, I don't understand. It looks like it's cured. It looks like it's solid. Looks like it's hard. Well, there was a pocket of resin on the inside, and so we just had to go into 3 shape, change the settings. So die design. Setting influences die design. So the pin type, it can be, I would highly recommend changing it to a die shape pin. The reason why is because you're going to get a broader surface area to attach the objects to the build head. From there, standard or free shape is fine. The base height of it, so the base height of the die needs to be at least 5 millimeters. The taller you go, you can actually decrease the ability to have the die having any sort of lateral movement inside the socket. And then there's a setting for the base stop surface width in 3 shape. Put that at 0.1, and then the stop surface angle at 40 degrees. The reason why is because if you see these models right here, when this is being printed, if I had this die right here, once it starts to get to this layer and this layer and this layer, when the projector is projecting through, any resting resin underneath of this is actually going to cure. So your die will never be seated completely down into the socket. So if you put it on that angle, or if you put that angle on the die, the amount of light that's going to bleed through right there is very minimal because it's a smaller surface area, so you don't have to worry about it not seating properly. Now, the formula for removable dies. So for the guys that are printing models here, are you guys printing with removable dies? Have you tried?
Yeah, unsuccessfully.
Okay. Saw another hand? Unsuccessfully?
No, we've gotten them to work, but we've messed with that friction bar setting, and that's the
Yeah.
reason. Yeah.
So there's, especially if you have a DLP printer or the Mask SLA printer, this works perfect. So with the Formlabs printer or the stereolithography laser, you have to do a little bit more work for it, but you can achieve it. So the two main settings is die to model spacing and friction bar overlap. So the correct way to do it is you take the distance for the die to model spacing, we're going to add that to the same distance value, the number value for the friction bar overlap, and you want that to equal 2 pixel widths, so the XY accuracy of the printer. The reason why you want it to actually have 2 pixels of width for this offset right here is because when the objects are being sliced in the slicing software, it's going to tell the projector what pixels need to be on. Well, if that is less than a pixel, if that distance is less than 1 pixel, you won't print friction bars. You'll look down that channel and you will have no friction bars at all. The slicing software wasn't able to actually achieve that. So that's why I like to go with 2 pixels. It gives a nice broad width. So a great example, Pro 275 has a 75 micron pixel. With our Whitmix Varamodel OS Ivory resin, our removable dies is we have a die to model spacing of 100 microns. We have a friction bar overlap of 50 microns. So it equals exactly 2 pixels. With this, we've had great results. Almost all of our customers print with removable dies. And we don't hear really of any inconsistencies or really any issues of the dies fitting. With this fitting, though, it is a very tight fit. So we want it to actually not have any sort of lateral movement. If I wanted to make it a little bit looser, then I would take my die to model spacing, I'd put it at 110 microns, and then I'd move my friction bar overlap to 40 microns, so 0.04. With that, I'm still at that 2 pixel width. This is crucial. It's pretty simple, but if you have any questions about this, you're more than welcome to give me a call, and I can help you dial in the removable die settings. So, castable resin design tips. So if you guys are doing any castables, you don't want to go with a wall thickness less than 0.3 millimeters, or what is described in the instructions of use. If it's a great resin manufacturer, they will have design settings almost listed for you. Margin line offset, once again, should be no less than the XY accuracy of the printer. So if you guys are designing castables on the Formlabs, your margin line offset cannot be less than 150 microns. If it's less than that, it can't really print it. You can't slice it to project it. For our Sega printers, for instance, on our Pro 275, we use a 75 micron 0.075 setting for our friction bar, or not friction bar, for our margin line offset. Cement gap should not change if the resin is properly scaled in the printer's CAM software. So if we already have a preset scale factor in, you should be able to use the exact same settings that you're already using for your crown and bridge applications. Clasp arms on RPD design, I would start at 1 millimeter and then work your way down. For the body of the RPD, I wouldn't go any less than 1 millimeter. And then, of course, when we're supporting these objects, we want to place supports on the prep surface, or not on the prep surface, but on the crucial surface. To me, that's pretty common sense. So surgical guides and Splints design tips. Surgical guides, I would go no less than 2 millimeters. We can see the one that we have here was 1.5. I've actually broke that a couple times. The teeth to tissue offset for the guide, I would go with 100 microns. That's a great starting point. If you feel like it's a little loose, then you can tune that down a little bit. If you feel it's a little bit tight, you're going to want to increase that number. And this is all dependent on the printer that you have. The sleeve guide offset, great value is 0.05 millimeters. And then include visual aids in your design. Put these seating windows in there so that the doctor can actually see that that guide is properly placed before he starts punching a hole in your patient's mouth. Splints for the wall thickness no less than 1 millimeter, occlusal thickness no less than 2 millimeters thick, offset for the teeth to the design of the splint 0.1 millimeters, and of course remember to block out undercuts during the design process. If you do not, that will not see onto the model or the patient. Now I see a lot of people where they want to support all of their objects, which is fine. But support angle does play a huge factor in the quality of the models you're going to get out. So horizontal versus 45 versus vertical. The most accurate way to print anything on a 3D printer is going to be putting it in a horizontal plane to the build plate. The reason why is because that's when the highest precision, the XY precision, is actually going to be placed onto that, or projected onto that build head. These are going to actually print faster as well, because as we all know with 3D printers, the higher, the taller the object it is, the longer it's going to take to print. But it can have some drawbacks. So if you're supporting a structure with a large surface area, you're going to want to change your support diameter to actually have a larger contact point, because what that does is that surface area, it can create like a Velcro effect when the model's printing and actually delaminate from the supports. So if you compare it to a 45 degree, there's an insignificant loss of accuracy. It's very minor. Your print times are going to increase, but it is the best or the most printer-friendly orientation, because the surface area that's going to be separating from the film is actually a very low surface area. You can do surgical guides, splints, RPD frameworks, and denture bases. Can all be printed that way with great success. Crown and bridge I would always do in horizontal, and then vertical. You're gonna have a little bit of a loss in detail and precision, but with this you're gonna want to print. I would only stick with orthodontic appliances, aligner models, which is something that's huge. Now let's go to types of print failures. So the most frustrating one that customers encounter is poor adhesion to the build plate. So this is when you just had your printer print for 3 hours and you walk into the lab all excited and nothing's on the build head. And so you can see it can even happen on the photo all the way to the left. We can see we have some structures actually attached to the build plate, but one model fell off. That's really frustrating as well. So how can we overcome that, and what causes it? So the very first cause is improper calibration of the build head. The build head needs to be calibrated so that it is in a true parallel fashion to the image plane below, or the resin vat. If it is tilted one way or another, you'll actually have some structures here on one side and then not the other. Another common cause is they selected the wrong material. So every material has a strategy that has a corresponding exposure time that is with it. So if I was to print my model material with my castable settings, my objects are not going to stick to the build plate because the cast has a faster reaction time. Dirty optics, huge. So the glass is dirty on it. And then photopolymers have a high warpage characteristic. So if the resin warps a lot, you can have just issues with sticking to the build plate at all. So resolutions to this would be calibrate the build head, make sure it's parallel. If you have an open source printer and you have the ability, you can try increasing the burn-in exposure time to help the object actually stick to the build head. And you can also create mechanical retention to the build plate surface. This is where you take your build plate off and go ahead and hit it with some like 400 grit sandpaper and actually create a little bit of a rougher surface to actually help the model stick to the build head. And then clean all optics of the printer itself. So we also have delamination between layers. This can also be very frustrating, and the causes of that would be improper normal layering exposure times. The light sources on some of the lower quality printers can have a fluctuation in the LED intensity itself. So LEDs, as we know, the LED light, they degrade over time and they can become less powerful. And actually they even have a break-in period where they become a little bit more intense right when we first get the printer. So if you start to encounter issues with that, if you don't have an open source printer, you don't have really a way to troubleshoot it or test it to increase your normal layering times, but that very well could be a cause of it. Dirty optics, once again, if anything that the light is transmitting through is dirty, dusty, has resin on it, you're going to have failed prints. And then if it's a hollow model, you can try, or a hollow structure, you can try supporting or placing manual supports on the objects itself. So another frustrating print that can happen is you print a model and it's got all this flash on the external surface. What causes that is actually overexposure during first the burn-in layer. So when that first burn-in layer is actually exposing, the light is going to refract out and actually will create flash around the edge of the model. When that build head then separates from that Teflon film or from the build vat, resin vat, the area that was outside of it can actually kind of sag and it'll break off into your resin. So the only way to fix that is you have to strain the resin and clean out the resin tray itself. But it's caused by overexposure. And then improper support generation. So we can see over here, I printed this model, it printed fine for the most part, but we can see the supports around the edge of the model are actually falling off. So to reduce this, make sure your optics are clean. Use the auto support function. If anybody's having issues with applying supports to structures, come over to the booth. I do have a method for finding the correct locations to apply manual supports. But if the printer itself has a auto support function, please use that. And then also you can increase the contact width of the supports. So can I save a failed print? No, unfortunately not. So printers are not like your mill, where your mill, let's say if it accidentally mills a crown or doesn't mill the internal or external surface, you can actually re-export out the calculations and re-mill over what you've already milled. You can do that with subtractive manufacturing. But additive, if you have an object fail during the print cycle, you have to clean it all off and start over again. So, Chris, how are we doing on time?
Great. 20 of 11.
Okay. So, I think I only have like 2 or 3 slides left, but how is the correct exposure time calculated? So, this is something that nobody sees unless you have an open source 3D printer. But essentially, every projector or every light source itself is measured with an intensity that's in milliwatts per centimeter squared. Every resin itself has its own property called a cure curve. So this is how the resin reacts with different dosages of light. A dosage of light is essentially the amount of time in seconds times milliwatts per centimeter squared. So if we look at this chart, if I wanted to print objects at 150 micron layers, so the left side of the chart is layer thickness, I would need a dosage of light almost equivalent to a 100. So how do we get exposure time out of that? Well, we take that dosage of 100 and we divide it by the milliwatts per centimeter squared that your projector has, or the light intensity, and that gives you how many seconds is needed to cure that layer properly. So if it had an intensity of 25 milliwatts per centimeter squared, we would then get, it would be a 4-second exposure time for a 150 micron layer for this exact resin. Now the next resin that you may have is going to have either a steeper curve or a flatter curve. This is something you see in the background. I almost deleted it just because it's a little more technical. Now, it's time for fun. So 3D printing fun. Who all here has been to Thingiverse.com? So very cool website. For anybody that gets a 3D printer, do not show the technicians that are printing with it, especially if you're the owner, because they will no longer work and they'll be looking at Thingiverse.com all day long and printing products and toys and tools and literally anything that you ever want can be found on this website. Don't show your employees. But it's super cool. I highly recommend going there. So key takeaways: do your homework before purchasing a printer. Receive, test, and compare them. You know how to compare them now in-house. There are material restrictions on some printers, so if you're looking for a material or a printer that can actually print any resin, make sure you look at an open source. Read the instructions of use, extremely important. Design with 3D printing in mind. Keep your printer clean, and then take the time to understand the technology and have fun. So that's it. Anybody have any questions?
What type of investment do you recommend?
So Whitmix actually manufactures their own investment. It's called Resin Vest. We just released that. And
Is that
so,
the one you have to weigh it yourself? It doesn't come in the
Yeah.
pre-gram packs?
yeah. Bernie would actually be the great.
It'll be in pre-weighed envelopes very soon.
Oh, great. All right. I've been using that for a couple months, getting really good results.
Really? Good.
Yeah,
Good.
just have to measure it.
Yeah. Well, where are you from?
Sacramento.
Okay. Cool. Yes.
Hey, on the, when you were saying before on the open source resins, and you noticed that there was only a 10% shrink rate,
Right.
was that a green measurement, or was that a post-cure measurement?
That would have been that was a post-cure measurement.
Wow, so you measured the difference between green and post-cure?
Yes, we do
And
for-
you got 10% on it.
Yeah.
Do you remember which ones you were looking at?
That was, it wasn't fun to do. It was Maker Juice.
Yeah, okay, so,
Yeah.
but fun to do probably too, yeah?
Well, Fun to Do is better than Maker Juice. I haven't used it. Al, you have used it. So Al's had great success with it, right?
Yeah, not
For the
bad.
most part.
Not bad, right?
Not bad.
I mean, you pay for what you get, and there's,
It separates really bad.
yeah,
I mean, really bad, in an hour.
But
yeah.
fun to do that, as you say.
Yeah.
Interesting.
You gotta really screw that, I mean, and it sticks all to the foil, the plastic bottom of the tray. It's hard to mix back up in the tray.
What's
Yeah, I
the,
quit using it, but fun to do.
I mean, it's,
But it is nice, they have tins, you put colors in, maybe whatever color you want. I mean, it's got some
For-
big advantage.
for your employees that want to actually use, or to print structures from that Thingiverse, that Fun to Do resin's perfect. You know, but you're not going to use your $300 bottle surgical grade resin to print a 3D toy.
Right.
So it works great for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah.
When I'm pressing Emacs, after we burn it out, grind off the screw, we're left with like a pop mark.
I know.
It's almost like porosity right where the screw is removed at. Just a little mark. Do you have any idea what that would be?
We can take a look at that. I have a phone number for a technician that would actually be great that you could talk with for that. But to me, it probably sounds like maybe the temperature's not high enough,
Yeah.
that it's not flowing properly. What do you think, Bernie?
What I would suggest is, as soon as we're finished here, just go next door, and there's one of our guys, Craig Pickett, who
Oh, yeah.
knows the investment very well, and you know, we'll be able to answer that.
Thanks.
Yeah, Al Hodges also.
This printer that you have, how does it compare to Joule 3D in terms of, is it different technology?
Yeah, well, Joule 3D, it's a similar technology in the fact that it uses a projector, but it actually it projects from the top down.
Right.
So you can't really control true layer thicknesses that way. So it's, you have a vat of resin that has a build head that's placed in it, and it lowers down into it, and the resting resin that's on top of the structure is what's being cured. I haven't had any experience with it, but I would probably go with something that's more with the bottom-up technique.
I have Joule 3D and I have a very bad experience with the company itself, everybody over there and the support.
Yeah, that's what it's.
Very, very, very bad. I just let everyone know that I want to take this printer and send it back to the manufacturer and stick it into his.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that you're having a bad experience with it.
Means their technician should go for continuing education.
Yeah.
When they come to give you a class, they should be able to make at least one surgical guide on the day of training.
Right.
Could not make even one surgical guide, and this guy does not have the answer to any question we asked. He, after 2 days of training, he left without having made one surgical guide on the Joule 3D printer. And after that, keep calling them. There was knowledge and, that thing that you can have an accident with that one. The grade goes up, goes up. And if you're not careful, your hand gets caught, then you're gonna have it like
Cut off?
yeah. So I told them why you don't design it like this. Now the new one, they really like it where electronic, the plate will not go out, So what happened because of that? My first printer, the rails got bent. So because it would not stop, and my technician said, we just put it out, so it doesn't get caught inside there. And then they came and replaced it, and the guy told me they gave me a floor model, the second one. They said, told me to give him a new one.
Yeah, definitely, when you go to purchase a 3D printer, definitely look at the company that's going to be supporting it as well, and actually talk with the technicians.
No,
that
somebody
do it.
told me John Bullard is a very charismatic guy.
Oh, is that, I don't know who that is. But
So, like, he is the man, he's a dentist who's inventor and all this stuff, and he makes these things. Because of that recommendation from somebody, I went for that printer. They said it's a workhorse of Oracle Labs and all that, right? But we really had a bad experience. Maybe the printer is not bad, it just the support of the person, they don't know staff, they don't know.
right,
Yeah, that's it.
it's crucial. Any other questions that I can answer for you guys? Cool. Oh, wait.
My question is, with the 3-shape scanner, is there like a setting that we can use to dial that in to make sure that every single time it's followed?
I mean, really you're going to want to do your weekly calibrations if you're trying to figure out like accuracy with your scanner. I recommend calibrating every Monday. So like when I worked at my dad's lab, I'd come in the morning, Monday morning, have a cup of coffee, calibrate. You know, it's just a routine. There is a temperature scale that's on the, if you'll note the ScanSuite software, scan server, there's a temperature value there. If that temperature deviates greater than 10 degrees from your calibration, you need to recalibrate. And actually the software will prompt you, at least the later versions will. All right. Well, no other questions, I think.
If there are no other questions, thank you, Chris.